Chapter 24, Fist of God. The land grew dry and the air grew thin. Fist of God seemed to flee before them. The fruit was gone and the meat supply was dwindling. This was a barren upward slope that culminated in Fist of God itself, a desert Lewis had once estimated was larger than the earth. Wind whistled around the edges and corners of the improbable. By now they were almost directly to spinward of the great mountain. The arch glowed blue and sharp-edged. The stars were hard, vivid points. Speaker looked upward through the big bay window. "Lewis, can you locate the galactic core from here?" "What for? We know where we are." "Do it anyway." Lewis had tentatively identified some stars, had guessed at certain distorted constellations, and in the months he had spent beneath the sky. There, I think, behind the arch. "Just so. The galactic core lies in the plane of the Ringworld." I said that. "Remember that the Ringworld Foundation material will stop neutrinos, Lewis. Presumably it will stop other subatomic particles." The Gazin was plainly getting at something. "That's right, the Ringworld is immune to the core explosion. When did you figure this out?" "Just now. I had placed the core some time ago." "You'd get some scattering, heavy radiation around the rim walls." "But the luck of Tila Brown would place her away from the rim wall when the wave front arrives." 20,000 years. Lewis was appalled. Finnegal's bright smile. How can anyone think in such terms? "Sickness and death are always bad luck, Lewis. By our assumptions, Tila Brown should live forever." "But, right. She's not thinking in those terms. It's her luck, hovering over us all like a puppet master." Nessus had been a corpse at room temperature for 2 months now. He did not decay. The lights on his first aid kit remained alight and even changed on occasion. It was his only sign of life. Lewis was gazing at the puppeteer minutes later when two thoughts rubbed together. "Puppeteer," he said softly. "Lewis." "I just wondered if the puppeteers didn't get their name by playing God with the species around them. They've treated humans and Kzinti like puppets. There's no denying that." "But Tila's luck made a puppet of Nessus." "We've all been playing God at various levels." Lewis nodded at Brill, who was catching perhaps every third word. "Brill and you and me. How did it feel, Speaker? Were you a good god or a bad one?" "I cannot know. The species was not my own, though I have studied humans extensively. I stopped a war, you will remember. I pointed out to each side that it must lose. That had been 3 weeks ago." "Yeah, my idea." "Of course." "Now you'll have to play God again." "To Kzinti," said Lewis. "I do not understand." "Nessus and the other puppeteers have been playing planned breeding games on humans and Kzinti. They deliberately brought about a situation in which natural selection would favor a peaceable Kzin, right?" "Yes." "What would happen if the patriarchy learned of this?" "War," said the Kzin. "A heavily provisioned fleet would attack the puppeteer worlds after a 2-year flight. Perhaps humanity would join us. Surely the puppeteers have insulted you as badly." "Surely they have. And then?" "Then the Leaf Eaters would exterminate my species down to the last kitten. Lewis, I do not intend to tell anybody anything concerning starseed lures and puppeteer breeding plans. Can I persuade you to keep silence?" "Right." "Is that what you meant by playing God to my species?" That and one more thing, said Lewis. The long shot. Do you still want to steal it? Perhaps, said the Gazin. You can't do it, said Lewis, but let's assume you could. Then what? Then the Patriarchy would have a second quantum hyperdrive. And Brill seemed to be aware that something crucial was happening. She watched them as if ready to stop a fight. Soon we would have warships capable of crossing a light year in 1¼ minutes. We would dominate known space, enslave every species within our reach. And then it ends. This is precisely our ambition, Lewis. No, you'd keep conquering. With a drive that good, you'd move outward in all directions, spreading thin, taking every world you found. You'd conquer more than you could hold, and in all that expanded space you'd find something really dangerous. The puppeteer fleet. Another Ringworld, but at the height of its power. Another slaver race just starting its expansion. Bandersnatchy with hands, Grogs with feet, Kitatlino with guns. Scare images. You've seen the Ringworld. You've seen the puppeteer worlds. There must be more in the space you could reach with the puppeteer hyperdrive. The Gazin was silent. Take your time, said Lewis. Think it through. You can't take the long shot anyway. You'd kill us all if you tried it. The next day, the improbable crossed a long, straight, meteoric furrow. They turned to anti-spinward, directly toward Fist of God. Fist of God Mountain had grown large without coming near. Bigger than any asteroid, roughly conical, she had the look of a snow-capped mountain swollen to nightmare size. The nightmare continued, for Fist of God continued to swell. I don't understand, said Brill. She was puzzled and upset. This formation is not known to me. Why was it built? At the rim there are mountains as high, as decorative, and more useful, for they hold back the air. That's what I thought, Louis Wu said, and he would say no more. That day, they saw a small glass bottle resting at the end of a meteoric gouge they had been following. The lyre was as they had left it, on its back on a frictionless surface. Mentally, Louis postponed the celebration. They were not home yet. In the end, Brill had to hover the improbable so that Louis could cross from the landing ramp. He found controls that would open both doors of the airlock at the same time, but air murmured out around them all the time they were transferring Nessus's body. They could not reduce the cabin pressure without Nessus, and Nessus was, to all appearances, dead. But they got him into the autodock anyway. It was a puppeteer-shaped coffin, form-fitted to Nessus himself, and bulky. Puppeteer surgeons and mechanics must have intended that it should handle any conceivable circumstance. But had they thought of decapitation? They had. There were 2 heads in there, and 2 more with necks attached, and enough organs and body parts to make several complete puppeteers. Grown from Nessus himself, probably. The faces on the heads looked familiar. Brill came aboard and landed on her head. Rarely had Louis seen anyone so startled. He had never thought to tell her about induced gravity. Her face showed nothing as she stood up, but her posture. She was awed to silence. In that ghostly silence of homecoming, Louis Wu suddenly screamed like a banshee. "Coffee!" he yelled, and "hot water!" He charged into the stateroom he had shared with Tila Brown. A moment later, he put his head out and screamed, "Brill!" Brill went. She hated coffee. She thought Louis must be insane to swallow the bitter stuff, and she told him so. The shower was a long-lost, badly missed luxury once Lewis explained the controls. She went wild over the sleeping plates. Speaker was celebrating the homecoming in his own fashion. Lewis didn't know everything about the Gazin's stateroom. He did know that the Gazin was eating his head off. "Meat," Speaker exulted. "I was not happy eating long-dead meat." "That stuff you're eating now is reconstituted." "Yes, but it tastes freshly killed." That night, Brill retired to a couch in the lounge. She appreciated the sleeping field, but not for sleeping. But Louis Wu slept in free fall for the first time in 3 months. He slept 10 hours and woke feeling like a tiger. A half-disk of sun flamed beneath his feet. Back aboard the Improbable, he used the flashlight laser to free the knobbed end of the shadow square. When he finished, it still had some fused electro-setting plastic attached. He did not try to carry it to the lyre. The black thread was far too dangerous, the ring floor far too slippery. Lewis moved on all fours on the frictionless surface, and he pulled the knob behind him. He found Speaker silently watching from the airlock. Lewis entered the airlock via Prill's stepladder, pushed past the Gazin, and went aft. Speaker continued to watch. The farthest point aft in the wreck of the lyre was a channel the size of a man's thigh. It had passed wiring to machinery in the lyre's wing when the lyre had had a wing. Now it was sealed by a metal hatch. Lewis opened the hatch, tossed the knobbed end of the wire through and outside. He moved forward. At intervals, he checked the position of the wire by using it to slice a Jinxian sausage dialed from the lyre's kitchen. Then he marked the spot with bright yellow paint. When he finished, the path of the virtually invisible thread was marked in a line of yellow splotches running through the lyre. When the wire drew taut, it would certainly cut through some internal partitions of the ship. The yellow paint allowed Lewis to gauge the path it would take, and to assure himself that the wire would not damage any part of the life support system. But the paint had another purpose. It would warn them all to keep away from the wire, lest they lose fingers or worse. Lewis left the airlock, waited for Speaker to follow him out. Then he closed the outer door. At this point, Speaker asked, "Is this why we came?" "Tell you in a minute," said Lewis. He walked aft, along the General Products hull, picked up the knob in both hands, and tugged gently. The wire held. He put his back into it. He pulled with all his strength. The wire did not budge. The airlock door held it fast. There's just no way to give it a stronger test. I wasn't sure the airlock door would be a close enough fit. I wasn't sure the wire wouldn't abrade General Products hull. I'm still not sure. But yes, this is why we came. What shall we do next? We open the airlock door. He did it. We let the thread slide freely through the lyre while we carry the handle back to the Improbable and cement it in place. And they did that. The thread that had linked the shadow squares trailed invisibly away to starboard. It had been dragged for thousands of miles behind the Improbable, because there was no way to get it aboard the flying building. Perhaps it trailed all the way back to the tangle of thread in the city beneath heaven, a tangle like a cloud of smoke that might have held millions of miles of the stuff. Now it entered the lyre's double airlock, circled through the lyre's fuselage, out to the wiring channel, and back to a blob of electrosetting plastic on the underside of the flying building. So far so good, said Lewis. Now I'll need Brill. No, Tangent, I forgot. Brill doesn't have a pressure suit. A pressure suit? We're taking the Improbable up Fist of God Mountain. The building isn't airtight. We'll need pressure suits, and Brill doesn't have one. We'll have to leave her here. Up Fist of God Mountain, Speaker repeated. Lewis, one fly cycle has not the power to drag the lyre up that slope. You propose to burden the motor with the additional mass of a floating building. No. I don't want to drag the lyre. All I want to do is pull the shadow square wire behind us. It should slide freely through the lyre until I give Brill the word to close the airlock door. Speaker thought about it. That should work, Lewis. If the puppeteer's fly cycle has not the power we need, we can cut away chunks of the building to make it lighter. But why? What do you expect to find at the top? I could tell you in one word, and then you'd laugh in my face. Speaker, if I'm wrong, I swear you'll never know, said Lewis Wu. And he thought, I'll have to tell Brill what to do, and plug the lyre's wiring channel with plastic. It won't stop the thread from sliding, but it should make the lyre nearly airtight. The Improbable was not a spaceship. Her lifting power was electromagnetic, thrusting against the ring foundation itself, and the ring floor sloped up toward Fist of God. For Fist of God was hollow. Naturally, the Improbable tended to tilt, to slide back down against the push of the puppeteer's fly cycle. To that problem, Speaker had already found the answer. They were living in pressure suits before the journey had properly begun. Lewis sucked pap through a tube, and thought yearningly of steak broiled with a flashlight laser. Speaker sucked reconstituted blood, and thought his own thoughts. They certainly didn't need the kitchen. They cut that part of the building loose and improved the tilt of the building to boot. They cut away air conditioning and police equipment. The generators that had ruined their fly cycles went only after they had been positively identified as separate from the lifting motors. Walls went. Some walls were needed for their shade, for heating became a problem in the direct sunlight. Day by day they neared the crater at the top of Fist of God, a crater that would have swallowed most asteroids. The lip of the crater looked like no impact crater Lewis had ever seen. Shards like obsidian spearheads formed a jagged ring. Spearheads the size of mountains themselves. There was a gap between two such peaks. They could enter there. I take it, said Speaker, that you wish to enter the crater itself. That's right. That it is good that you noticed the pass. The slope above is too steep for our drive. We should reach the pass very soon. Speaker was steering the Improbable by modifying the fly cycle thrust. That had been necessary since they cut away the stabilizing mechanism in a final attempt to reduce the building's weight. Lewis had grown used to the bizarre appearance of the Kazin. The 5 transparent concentric balloons of his pressure suit, the fishbowl helmet with its maze of tongue controls half hiding the Kazin's face, the tremendous backpack. Calling Brill, Lewis said into the intercom. Calling Harlor Brillalar. Are you there, Brill? I am. Stay there. We'll be through in 20 minutes. Good. You've been long enough at it. The arch seemed to blaze above them. 1,000 miles above the Ringworld, they could see how the arch merged into the rim walls and the flat landscape. Like the first man in space 1,000 years ago, looking down on an earth that, by Yahweh and his mighty hammer, really was round. We could have known, said Lewis Wu, not loudly, but Speaker looked up from his work. Lewis didn't notice the Kazin's odd look. It would have saved us so much trouble. We could have turned back after we found the shadow square wire. Tange, we could have dragged the lyre straight up Fist of God Mountain behind our fly cycles. But then Tila wouldn't have met Seeker. The luck of Tila Brown again. Sure, Lewis shook himself. Have I been talking to myself? I have been listening. We should have known, said Lewis. The gap between the sharp peaks was very near. He felt the urge to babble. The engineers would never have built a mountain this high here. They've got over 1 billion miles of 1,000-mile-high mountains, if you count both rim walls. But Fist of God is real, Lewis. No. It's just a shell. Look down. What do you see? Ringworld foundation material. We thought it was dirty ice when we first saw it. Dirty ice in a hard vacuum. But forget that aspect. Remember the night you explored a giant map of the Ringworld? You couldn't find Fist of God. Why not? The Gazin didn't answer. It wasn't there, that's why not. It wasn't there when the map was made. Brill, are you there? I am here. Why would I leave you? Good. Close the airlock doors. Repeat, close the airlock doors now. Don't cut yourself on the thread. My people invented this thread, Lewis. Brill's voice was garbled with static. She was off for a minute, then, both doors are closed. The improbable was passing between the standing shards of mountain. Tense as Lewis was, he could have been still more tense. But subconsciously, he was expecting a kind of canyon or pass between those peaks. Lewis, just what do you expect to find in Fist of God crater? Stars, said Lewis Wu. The Gazin was tense too. Do not mock me, in all honor. And they were through. There wasn't any pass. There was only a broken eggshell of Ringworld foundation material, stretched by terrific stresses to a few feet of thickness, and beyond that, the crater in Fist of God Mountain. They were falling, and the crater was full of stars. Lewis Wu had an excellent imagination. In his mind's eye, the event was perfectly clear. He saw the system of the Ringworld, sterile, tidally clean, empty of ram ships, empty but for a G2 star and a daisy chain of shadow squares, and the Ringworld. He saw a foreign body passing near, too near. He watched its hyperbolic fall from interstellar space, and he saw its path interrupted by the underside of the Ringworld. In his vision, the foreign body was about the size of Earth's moon. It must have been ionized plasma in the first seconds. A meteorite can be cooled by ablation, by the boiling away of its own skin. But here, the vaporized gas could not expand. It had forced its way into a deforming bucket of the Ringworld floor. The landscape had deformed upward. Its carefully planned ecology and rainfall patterns shot to hell over a region greater than the surface of the earth. All that desert, and Fist of God itself, raised a full 1,000 miles upward before the incredibly tough ring floor ripped to let the fireball through. Fist of God. Tange, yes. Watching from a Ringworld prison cell, Lewis had seen it clear in his mind's eye. It must have been visible clear to both rims. A ball of hellfire the size of the Earth's moon, ripping up through the floor of the Ringworld like a strong man's fist through a cardboard box. The natives could be thankful that the ring floor had deformed as much as it did. The hole was easily big enough to let all the air out of the Ringworld, but it was 1,000 miles too high. The crater was full of stars, and there wasn't any gravity. There wasn't anything for the lifting motors to push against. Lewis hadn't really thought this far ahead. Grab something, he bellowed, and hang on. If you fall through the bay window, there'll be no rescue. Naturally not, said Speaker. He was wrapped around a naked metal beam. Lewis had found another. Was I right? Stars. Yes, Lewis, but how did you know? There was gravity, a steady, heavy pull on the improbable. The skeleton of a building turned on its side, and the bay window was up. It's holding, Lewis said fiercely. He wriggled to get right side up on the beam. It better. I hope Prill strapped down she'll have a bouncy ride. Up the side of Fist of God Mountain, riding at the end of 10,000 miles of Shadow Square wire. Up and over the lip, then. They looked up at the underside of the Ringworld, an infinity of sculptured surface. In the middle, a tremendous conical meteor puncture, shiny at the bottom. As the improbable swung like a plum bum, underneath the Ringworld, the sun flashed suddenly in the bottom of the crater. Out and down. Then we'll be tied up to the lyre, and the lyre will be on its way to clear space at 77 miles per second. Plenty of time for the wire to pull us together. But if that doesn't work, we've got the thruster motor in Nessis's fly cycle. How did I know? I've been telling you that. Didn't I mention the landscape? No. That was the clincher. All the peaks of the foundation material showed through the rock, and the fall of civilization only 1,500 years old. It was because those two asteroid punctures had fouled up the wind patterns. Do you realize that most of the traveling we did was between those two punctures? Very indirect reasoning, Lewis. It worked. Yes, and so I will live to see another sunset, the Gazin said softly. Lewis felt an electric thrill. You too? Yes, I watch sunsets on occasion. Let us speak of the long shot. What did you say? If I could steal the long shot from you, my kind would dominate known space until a stronger species impinged on our expanding sphere. We would forget all we have learned so painfully regarding cooperation with alien species. True, Lewis said into the dark. The pull from the stolen Shadow Square wire was steady now. The lyre must be well on its way up Fist of God's 10-degree slope. We might not get that far while the luck of many Tila Browns protects Earth. Yet honor would compel me to make the attempt, said Speaker to Animals. How could I lead my species away from the honorable path of war? The Kzinti gods would revile me. I warned you about playing God. It hurts. Fortunately, the difficulty does not arise. You have said that I would destroy the long shot if I tried to take it. The risk is too great. We will need the puppeteer hyperdrive to escape the wave front from the core explosion. True enough, said Lewis. The Kazin would back into the nearest gravity well if he tried to take the long shot into hyperdrive. Knowing that, Lewis asked, But suppose I were lying? I could not hope to outwit a being of your intelligence. Sunfire flashed again in the Fist of God crater. Think how short a way we came, said Lewis. 150,000 miles in 5 days, the same distance back in 2 months. A seventh of the short way across the Ringworld. Antila and Seeker think they're going the long way round. Fools. We never saw the rim wall. They will. I wonder what else we missed. If the Ringworld ram ships got as far as Earth, they may have picked up some blue whales and sperm whales before we made them extinct. We never got out onto the ocean. The people they'll meet. There's no end to the ways a culture can go. And the room. The Ringworld's so big. We can't go back, Lewis. No, of course not. Not until we can deliver our secret to our respective worlds and acquire an intact ship.